Hi there, welcome. It is really remarkable, isn't it, how in the last, say, 2 years, 3 years, the growing debate on AI in society has been resurfacing some of the oldest, deepest, most important philosophical questions. What is a human being? What is the point of work? What does a good life look like? And in this video, I want to reflect on those questions in the light of AI, and I want to do so through Pope Leo XIV's Encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas. I want to use that as a starting point. Now, I want to think about three key themes in that encyclical, and I want to try to draw out of them a biblically grounded conceptual toolbox to help Christians navigate the AI age. Now, Magnifica Humanitas is a significant document, isn't it? 245 paragraphs, 224 footnotes, over 42,000 words, and as far as I can see from the website, translated into 9 languages. And since it was published, I don't know if you've noticed, it seems to be shifting the debate on AI, and I think in fundamentally helpful ways. Because too often, the debate around AI focuses only on what it can do, whether it will take our jobs, whether it poses huge social risks or cybersecurity risks. And these are key questions, but they rest, I think, on more fundamental considerations about the nature of humanity, the nature of work, and the nature of the good society. And one of the encyclical's great achievements is that it has nudged the conversation towards these more fundamental themes. It's moved us beyond the usual questions of capability, productivity, risk, regulation, and back towards deeper theological and philosophical questions. Specifically, what does it mean to be a human being in the age of increasingly intelligent machines? I recently came across 2 videos that represented, for me, that really crystallized in my own mind the reach of this encyclical and the way that it's reorienting the debate. The first was from the Rest is Politics UK podcast, one of the UK's leading political podcasts. And its hosts, Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, were agreed. Rory Stewart, something of a Christian, I think it's fair to say. Alistair Campbell, most certainly not a Christian. And they were agreed on the idea that AI is becoming central to politics and economics, and that the Pope is making a really important moral and political case about it. Listen to what they say.
Let's start with His Holiness the Pope. This is a huge story because, as listeners will be aware, AI is now developing as probably the biggest single thing in global politics, economics. It could be mass unemployment, it could be autonomous drones, it could be war. And here is the first attempt for a very significant global public figure to make the moral case for how we should think about AI. But it's not just moral, it's a political case. And it's a Pope bringing with him hundreds of millions of Catholics, but more than that, actually articulating things that I would think would be shared by nearly 2 billion Christians around the world, and doing it in a way that resonates not just with Christians, but as I think we'll find when we talk to you, with actually many, many people, including yourself, who's a sort of Christian-friendly atheist, because it is an attempt to frame it also in terms of the progressive humanist values of the post-Second World War. So probably the strongest way of looking at AI I've seen.
And of course, it is about so much more than AI. But I'll tell you how I read it as a call to all of us to rediscover and to implement in our own ways the values which he clearly feels are being eroded by the technology, and above all, by those who are using it for malign ends in politics and in business.
A really exciting thing to read because it's so unusual in modern politics, because it starts really from the question of what are we here for? What is human meaning? What's human purpose? We take it as for granted in the rest is politics that we're here to try to make people richer, live longer, fix the potholes, get the NHS working well, all of which is very good stuff, and a lot of which is what Tony Blair is implicitly focused on. But of course, the Pope takes us back to something more fundamental, which is, what does it mean to be human? What's the purpose of life? What's the meaning of life? And then he rubs that up against the question of AI. And the fundamental question.
And I've got many, many favorite passages, but one of them, he has this one line: a more moral AI is not enough if that morality is determined by a few. And the many, not the few theme just runs through the whole thing. And his obvious worry that there's going to be the risk that this is going to produce even greater inequality in an already far too unequal world. I think that's why I just felt it was so brilliant.
The second video that really showed to me that this encyclical is making a splash beyond just Christian circles was a YouTube channel hosted by someone called Matthew Berman. It's a tech channel. Matthew has recently interviewed the Alphabet CEO, Sundar Pichai, at the Google I/O conference. And listen to what he said about the encyclical.
So here's the 40,000 word encyclical titled Magnifica Humanitas. So first, the title, Magnifica Humanitas, magnificent humanity, is what that means. And basically what the Pope is trying to say is that there is something distinctly special about humans. And with artificial intelligence and all the talk about it potentially being conscious, or maybe it's going to be conscious in the future, and it's going to replace a lot of what humans do, he's saying, don't forget, humans are amazing. Now, here is the part where I do absolutely agree with what he's saying. In the era of artificial intelligence, when human dignity is threatened by new forms of dehumanization, ours is the pressing duty to remain profoundly human.
So this encyclical across the board, politics, tech world, as well as among Christians, is significantly, I think, shifting the dial in ways that are really important. I want to focus on three themes from the encyclical. I want to begin by thinking about the theme of receiving and sharing, particularly in relation to this governing motif that comes in its introduction and conclusion and is woven throughout, this contrast between the Tower of Babel on the one hand and Nehemiah reconstructing the walls of Jerusalem on the other. The second major theme that I'd like to focus on is the central commitment of the encyclical to what it calls the dignity of each person. What are we to make of human dignity in the age of AI? And thirdly, and finally, the encyclical's commitment to what it calls the good of all peoples. And I want to use that as an opportunity to reflect on the common good, what that means in the age of AI. And out of all three of these, I want to draw a series of concepts that Christians can use to navigate the AI debates in a distinctively biblical way, I hope. A toolbox that you can take away from this video and use as you continue to think about AI. So then, the first major theological motif that greets us in the opening paragraphs of Magnifica Humanitas, and that really frames the whole encyclical, is a contrast between two building projects, building the Tower of Babel and Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem after the exile. And this is really helpful because it allows the document to nuance its approach to AI right from the outset. It's not saying, technology is bad, therefore we need to stop building, but nor is it saying technology is good and therefore let's build without limits. And the question, quite rightly, I think, is framed not as whether humanity will build. Of course we'll build. We're creatures made to cultivate, to name, to order, to image, to repair the world. The question is, what sort of building are we doing? Under what authority? In view of what love? For which good are we building? And the builders of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, you remember the episode in the Bible, they gather on the plain of Shinar and they say to themselves, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves. This is an astonishingly contemporary scene, isn't it? There's a single language, there's a single technological project, a single civilizational ambition, a shared desire to secure the future by means of human coordination and technical mastery. The problem, of course, is not that these tower builders are building. The problem is that their building is an act of self-securing, of self-assertion. It's actually an open rejection of God's explicit command to fill the earth a few short chapters earlier. And here they are all gathering in one place, very much not filling the earth. They build in order to make a name for who? Well, for themselves, to rival God, who in the next chapter we learn is the one who makes his people's name great. But the tower builders don't want that. We will be the ones who make our own name great. Thank you very much. And the second image that the encyclical contrasts to this is Nehemiah rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And the first thing that the encyclical notes is, look, this is building again. Here a city, here are walls. This is not anti-building. But the posture is entirely different. It's very non-Babelian, this building project. Nehemiah doesn't begin with a manifesto to make his own name great. He begins actually by hearing. He receives the news that Jerusalem's in ruins, the walls are broken, the gates are being destroyed by fire. And before he ever lays a brick on another, he mourns, he fasts, he prays, he confesses the sins of Israel. He appeals to the covenant promises of God. And only then does he go back and seek to rebuild the wall. And when Nehemiah eventually begins the rebuilding, he doesn't impose some sort of Babelian totalizing solution from above. The work is very clearly, and the encyclical really draws this out, very radically distributed. Each person, each family, in fact, is given a little section of wall over which they have responsibility. They need to rebuild that few meters of wall. And therefore, the city is rebuilt not as a top-down project of control, but as a shared task. And in that sense, Nehemiah gives us a biblical picture of what Catholic social teaching calls subsidiarity. Not abandoning people to fend for themselves, but not centralizing all power and responsibility either. It's a way of letting power run down to the lowest possible level where it can reside, giving people agency and responsibility over their own role in the bigger project, everybody contributing to the common work of rebuilding the wall. And that's why I think the encyclical's use of Nehemiah is really powerful for thinking about artificial intelligence. Because the choice is never between technology and anti-technology. The choice is between Babel and Nehemiah, between building as a project of domination and building as a shared work under God, between a single language that reduces everything to data and performance, and a common language that emerges from communion and listening and responsibility, shared action in response to God. I want to give a label to these two building projects. This is the first tool in the toolbox that I want to develop. I want to call this Babelian type of building grasping, and I want to talk about Nehemiah's type of building as active receiving. Let me just try and unpack those two terms. I'm going to keep referring back to them throughout the different parts of this video. So by grasping this Babelian type of meaning, I mean the attempt to relate to the world as if it were, first of all, simply material for my self-construction. Grasping isn't merely using things, it's trying to secure itself through them. It is making my name through what I do. It treats meaning, in this context, making my name great, as something that I must generate, as something that's artificial, made by me, and therefore as something that I possess, that I defend. My identity is something that I quite literally perform by building it. And power is something that I must accumulate in order to be safe and to defend and protect that identity. And that is what makes Babel so revealing, isn't it? Its builders are not simply ambitious, nothing wrong with godly ambition. They're trying to manufacture a shared world without receiving it as a gift. They want a name, they want a centre, they want a language, they want a future, but they want these things on their own terms, paying no regard to the one who gave them the land, the bricks, themselves, the very air that they breathe. So grasping, then, is the posture of the self-made city, the attempt to turn the gift of creation into a possession, and also to turn plurality into uniformity, one language, to turn vocation into control, and to turn communion into strict coordination. That's grasping. Active reception, which is the term I'm using to describe what Nehemiah does, is very different to that. Now, first of all, you might think from the term active reception that it's some form of passivity, receiving simply in the sense of sitting there and doing nothing and letting something happen to you. But that is not the biblical sense of receiving. It's very emphatically not doing nothing. You think of it as action disciplined by gift. It's agency, but it's agency exercised in trust as gratitude through obedience. Nehemiah receives the news of the brokenness of Jerusalem as a burden from God. And precisely because he receives it, he goes and acts. He acts, first of all, remember, by praying, by asking of God, and then by going, inspecting, speaking, and finally organizing and building. So active reception then names this middle posture between, on the one hand, Babelian self-sufficient mastery. We're the ones who decide what we're doing. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're not going to pay attention to anyone else. And on the other side, some sort of passive, helpless resignation. So for active reception, we don't invent the world. We don't invent our name, our identity, nor do we dominate our neighbours. We receive these things as gifts from God. But we receive them in such a way that the receiving itself becomes creative and responsible and shared. And in that sense, Nehemiah's wall is not the opposite of human work at all. It is human work, but restored to its proper form, building as a grateful participation in a task that both precedes us and ultimately exceeds us. And so one of the deepest ironies in this contrast between Babel and Nehemiah is that grasping doesn't finally secure unity, does it? The tower builders of Babel do not achieve the goal that they're aiming for. They actually end up at the end of their narrative in Genesis 11, scattered across the face of the earth. The builders gather together because they fear dispersion, but their attempt to secure a shared world by possession and control actually ends up destroying the very thing they sought to protect. It's a very ironic story, isn't it, Babel? They want one name, one language, one centre, one future, but because that unity is grasped rather than received, it collapses into confusion and fragmentation. And the name that they get, a name that echoes down through the centuries up to our day, is very much not the name that they hoped for. It is a name of frustration. Babel is identified, isn't it, with hubris and humiliation, not with the great name they aimed for. And this, I think, is a dynamic that we already see and will continue to see again and again in the age of AI. Because when we try to manufacture common life through control and optimization, surveillance, prediction, or through a single technical language into which everything human must be translated, we don't end up creating communion. We actually end up often intensifying loneliness, or mistrust, or rivalry, or even political combustion. See, grasping on the front end promises coherence, doesn't it? But on the back end, it generates scattering. active reception, by contrast, makes genuine sharing possible, because it receives the common world as a gift before it tries to build anything with it. The Encyclical leans on Augustine's framework of two cities in the city of God, and it really does help to deepen this distinction between Babel and Nehemiah. Augustine famously says that two loves have made two cities. The earthly city, he says, is formed by the love of self, even to the contempt of God. And that's very Babelian, isn't it? We're going to do our own thing, even if God has very clearly commanded otherwise. And the heavenly city is formed by the love of God, Augustine says, even to the contempt of self. In other words, if my particular desires or ambitions should clash with what God wants, one of those will have to win. I will have to either be in contempt of myself to the glory of God, or in contempt of God to my own glory. You can only have those two options, can't you, when that clash happens. And the two cities embody and symbolize those two ways of dealing with that clash between what I want and what God wants. And therefore, these two cities are not merely a contrast between two external institutions, as if you could, draw a simple line between bad society, which is the earthly city, and good society, which is the city of God. Augustine's trying to get at the way we live together at a deeper level than that. Because notice the language he uses: a city is built by what it loves. A civilization takes shape, he's saying. I think it's a very powerful thought, isn't it? Around its deepest desires, around its deepest dreams and longings. One way of thinking about it is the works of our hands disclose the worship of our hearts. And this is true in AI just as much as in any other technology. And Babel is a city of grasping, the city that receives the world as raw material for self-projection. But Jerusalem, that Nehemiah is rebuilding in the biblical imagination, is the city of gift, the city whose life depends on receiving from God and sharing with others. Babel says, let us make a name for ourselves. Jerusalem says, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labour in vain. So Babel and Jerusalem then are not two merely ancient stories, or not just a colourful way of bookending this encyclical. They are the two fundamental ways of inhabiting the world. And this distinction, as Augustine shows in the City of God, runs through the whole Bible. In the book of Revelation, the great contrast is between Babylon, which of course has its origin in Babel, and the heavenly Jerusalem. This is the great contrast of the whole Bible. And there are two further biblical details that are really crucial for understanding the depth and the resonance of this contrast for the biblical material and in the age of AI. The first one is that Babel is not simply an overambitious building project. It is in fact a refusal of vocation. So after the flood, in Genesis 6, God commands Noah and his sons to, quote, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But the builders of Babel, in effect, say, we hear you and we're ignoring you. No, let us not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. So the tower, therefore, is not just a monument to human pride, is it? It is an architectural, if you like, an architectural middle finger rising from the ground, pointed towards God. We think nothing of your command to fill the earth. We will do our own thing. Thank you very much, even though you are our creator. God says, fill the earth. Babel says, no, we're going to stay here. God gives a world to be received and explored and cultivated and filled and enjoyed. Babel tries to compress that world into one city, one name, one project, one language, one centre. And this, I think, reframes how Babel can inform our approach to AI. Because the Babelian temptation is not only to build powerful machines, that's not what Babel's talking about. It is to use technological power to evade creaturely calling, to refuse vulnerability, to refuse dispersal, to refuse plurality, actually, and to refuse what is always the hard labour of sharing a world with others who aren't simply extensions of ourselves. Babel is unity, but it's unity by compression. It's unity by diktat. It's unity from above. It's togetherness as control. And it's the common good counterfeit as a common project of self-protection. And this is why Babel can look so impressive. It must have been an amazing tower in the ancient world, the tallest that anyone had ever seen. And yet at the same time, it can be so spiritually vacuous and hollow. It has all the coordination you could wish, but it has no communion. It has a shared language, but no shared love, apart from the love of self. It has technical brilliance, but no obedient reception. It is a city built on the foundations of refusing the gift that God has given. Well, how different to the posture that Nehemiah offers us. Nehemiah isn't strictly obeying a verbal command that God has given him, like the ones given to Moses or to Abraham, go from your father's house, go to the land I will show you. There's no verse in the Bible where we hear God say, Nehemiah, rebuild me that wall. And actually that is incredibly helpful for us because if you're anything like me, you haven't had a direct extra biblical word from God either, saying, go and do this particular thing. And therefore, Nehemiah is very much in our position, isn't he? He hears of the ruins. He receives that news as a burden. He mourns, he prays. He remembers God's covenant promises. He goes back to Scripture. He asks the king for permission, and then when his request is granted, he interprets it as providence. He says, the good hand of my God was upon me. Later, he says that God had put it into his heart to do something for Jerusalem. This is a beautiful and I think really powerful description of what I'm calling active reception. This is not passivity, isn't it? Nehemiah is not just weeping in exile, lamenting the passing of Jerusalem. But nor is he engaged in a Babelian project of grasping. The biblical alternative to grasping isn't inert passivity, it is responsive participation. It is action, but it's action disciplined by gift. It's agency exercised in trust, in gratitude, in obedience. Nehemiah doesn't invent the meaning of his projects from nowhere. He's not saying, let's build some new city and call it Nehemiahville or whatever. No, he receives a burden in prayer. He steps into covenant memory. He interprets it as a providential circumstance. And he seeks to help a wounded people. He doesn't wait for the walls to rebuild themselves. He rises, he goes, he inspects, he acts, he speaks, he organizes. He has his eyes open, doesn't he? He tells people to strap a sword to their side, so if they get attacked while they're building the walls, they can defend themselves. He negotiates, he resists opposition. This is activity, isn't it? This is no mere sitting back and letting it happen. This is active reception. Not self-sufficient Babelian mastery, not helpful passivity. Think of it in this way. It's like the middle voice. Those of us who have studied ancient languages, neither completely active nor completely passive. It's receiving a task from God in such a way that the receiving itself becomes responsible action. And this posture of the middle voice, I think, is crucial for AI ethics. Because much of our public debate oscillates, doesn't it, between two really quite unhelpful postures. On the one hand, there's the technological grasping. There's the discourse of build faster, scale bigger, optimize everything, let power justify itself by its own momentum. And then on the other hand, often as the only way that can be imagined to resist that steamroller of just letting it rip with AI, there's a kind of helpless passivity. AI is coming, the corporations are too strong, the states and regulation are too slow, the race is already underway. All we can do is adapt to the inevitable. But the biblical pattern, and the pattern of Nehemiah, refuses both of those. It calls us to receive the present moment as a task, not to seize the future as if it belonged to us, and not to surrender the future as if nothing can be done, but to act faithfully within a world that remains, before all else, still the gift of God. And there's a second detail in this Nehemiah story that matters, I think, just as much as the first. Because Nehemiah's Jerusalem, the ultimate Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of the covenant, is not the city, finally, that he is rebuilding bit by bit. The city whose dirt he has under his fingernails, the city whose wall he is rebuilding, is a sign. It is a foreshadowing. He's building a provisional city that points always beyond itself. Because our deepest biblical hope is not finally that human beings will build a city here on earth for God, brick by brick. It is that God will give the ultimate city, the New Jerusalem, as Revelation calls it, to his people. We see this in Hebrews 11, verse 10, don't we, where Abraham was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is who? Nehemiah? No. Whose architect and builder is God. It's an extraordinary phrase, isn't it? God as the architect and builder of the New Jerusalem. And it shows us that the final city, the ultimate Jerusalem, of which the earthly Jerusalem is just a shadow, that is not our achievement. It is God's project. And that's why in Revelation, John sees the New Jerusalem, doesn't he, coming down out of heaven from God. The direction is all important there, isn't it? It's not built on earth and offered up to God. No, the city descends. It is given to humanity. It's received. Yeah, of course, the kings of the earth bring their glory and treasures into it. Human culture and labour and history are not discarded. We don't just sit back, put our feet up and let the city descend. But the city is fundamentally gift before we contribute anything to it. And this really frames our activity, doesn't it? It means that all our building, including all our technological building, is always resolutely penultimate. It can serve love and justice and healing and education and truth and the common good, but our building is never salvation. It's never the kingdom in its fullest sense. It is not, in other words, the city whose architect and builder is God. Our best building is always a form of witness, a form of anticipation, a response to God's good gift to us as God builds his kingdom through us, but not the initiation of that building, not the initiation of the kingdom, not the foundation. We build, in other words, under the sign of a city that we ourselves cannot manufacture. And I'd like to suggest that this posture of penultimacy frames everything that there is to say in a Christian response to AI, because there's quite an apocalyptic tone around AI these days, isn't there? Where it's either cast as our ultimate salvation, the one hope of the human race, or it's seen as an ultimate threat to the human race. But if we're framing our response to it in terms of the Jerusalem that we are helping to build on earth, foreshadowing the new Jerusalem that comes from heaven, then we can take the promises and the threats of AI seriously, but not unreflectively put them into the theological boxes of salvation and damnation. And therefore the Babel Jerusalem distinction has given us our first way of evaluating artificial intelligence. It shifted the question from simply, can we build it? Or on the other side, can we regulate it? To the deeper question, what kind of city are we building through it? Are we building Babel? a system of concentrated power with a single language, economic domination, artificial transcendence, fear of vulnerability? Or are we rebuilding in the way of Nehemiah, receiving this cultural moment as a shared task, distributing responsibility, protecting the vulnerable, honouring plurality, acting prayerfully, measuring progress not by technical capability alone, but with the context of the divine promises of a city whose architect and builder is, at the end of the day, God? So the Encyclical's first great motif, I think, gives us the fundamental structure we need. This age of AI is an age of building. But Christian wisdom, biblical wisdom, asks us to discern the love that is building it. Who are we loving as we build these technologies? That is the key question that Augustine draws our attention to. Is this building a grasping, or is it a receiving? Is it a Babel, or is it a Jerusalem? In Augustine's language, is it the earthly city, or is it the city of God? Is it the city that loves itself, or is it the city that learns to receive its life from God and to share it with others? And that brings us to the first half of what I think is the Encyclical's core ethical offering, which is the idea of the dignity of each person. The first great contrast was between two forms of building, Babelian grasping, Nehemiah active reception. That leaves us with a question, doesn't it? How do you test that building? How do we know whether a technological project is becoming Babel or whether it's helping us to rebuild together in the way of Nehemiah? There was one phrase sort of tucked away at the end of a paragraph in the Encyclical that I think functions as a litmus test for that question, and also as the beating ethical heart of the whole document. And it's this: it talks about the dignity of each person and the good of all peoples, the dignity of each person and the good of all peoples. Now, I want to structure the rest of this video around the two halves of that clause. And I want to begin with the dignity of each person. Dignity is one of those words, isn't it, that we use often enough, and we sort of assume we understand it, but it has a really quite complicated history. The Latin word dignitas originally has to do with worth and fittingness and honour and rank and status and, sort of high public standing. It's not, in the Roman use of the term, universal. Not everybody has dignity. It's a property possessed by those in high office, those with reputation, those with excellence, public esteem. And indeed, you can have degrees of it. Some people had more dignitas than others. So in this Roman origin, then, it's bound up with hierarchy, with achievement, with honour, with recognition. It's something you earn. And that history gives us a really helpful context for the biblical understanding of dignity. Because a biblical framework doesn't simply abolish dignity. It doesn't say, this is a Roman idea, so let's get rid of it altogether. It universalizes the impetus behind dignity. It takes the language of glory and of honour, of weight and of worth, the sort of things that circle around dignitas in ancient Rome. But it, quite wonderfully, refuses to reserve those things for kings or heroes or elites, conquerors, geniuses. Scripture says that the human being as such, all of us, are made in the image of God. Psalm 8 says that humanity, not a particular ruler or warrior or hero or aristocrat or intellectual, is, quote, crowned with glory and honour. So the biblical story doesn't flatten human beings into indistinguishable units, but it doesn't simply raise up some extraordinary individuals and say they're the ones with dignity, they're the ones with worth, they're the ones with honour, and not everybody else. Dignity is no longer in the Bible a prize for being impressive. It is, once more, a gift to every human creature. And I think this is one reason why this language that's chosen by the Encyclical is really helpful in the age of AI. There's a quote in the Encyclical that says, "Human dignity does not depend on a person's abilities, wealth, or position in life, nor on the right or wrong choices made. Instead, it is a gift that precedes and transcends each person, endowed by God as an expression of his unfailing love." It's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? It's an important sentence. Dignity does not depend on ability. It doesn't depend on productivity or wealth or usefulness. It doesn't depend even on the moral quality of my choices. In other words, whether I am, quote unquote, a good person. But even more radically than that, dignity, or to use Bible language, glory and honour, doesn't depend on what we can call, if you like to use an acronym, the SASSy qualities: sentience, agency, consciousness, intelligence. If I lose some of my SASSy qualities as a human being through disease or injury, or simply because I'm a tiny baby or an older person who's either losing control of my body or of my mind or of both, that has zero impact on my dignity within a biblical frame. And that truth is a sanctuary, isn't it, for the weak and the vulnerable in our society. And I suspect and fear that it will become increasingly crucial as a sanctuary as we move through the different stages of the AI revolution. The sanctuary is that in a biblical frame, dignity is not achieved, it is received. And that brings us to a tiny little word that it's easy to miss in this key sentence in the Encyclical, each. Because it's not simply speaking of dignity in the abstract, and it's not actually speaking of the dignity of every person. That's not the word it chooses. It chooses the word each. Now, what's the difference in nuance there? Well, if we spoke about the difference of every person, it could be heard, couldn't it, as some sort of homogeneous mass. Everybody in general, humanity in bulk, the species as a whole, the great undifferentiated anthropological porridge. But each is distributive, isn't it? Each moves from individual person to individual person until all have been covered, until all have been seen. Now, each says this one, and this one, and this one, and this one too. It's not merely humanity in general, but each indicates this child, this elderly person, this disabled person, this refugee, this unemployed worker, this lonely teenager, this CEO, this data labeler, this prisoner, this unborn child, this person whose capacities are declining, this person who does not seem economically, quote unquote, useful. This word in the Encyclical put me in mind of one of the French philosophers that I've studied. His name, he's passed away a couple of years ago now. His name is Jean-Luc Nancy. And he insists that all being is always what he calls, getting the term from Heidegger, being with, hyphenated. But that being with doesn't devalue our singularity, the fact that we're all unique. So for Nancy, we're not first isolated atoms who later decide to enter relationships, nor are we some sort of mass out of which emerge individual persons like waves on the sea. We are what he calls singular plural, again hyphenated. Each person, you, in other words, and me, we are irreducibly singular. We can't be replaced by anyone else. And yet no one person, neither you nor me, exists in isolation. We always already exist in relationship with other people. And the label that I want to put on this idea, because I think it is a profoundly biblical idea, and I think it can be shown that Nancy is drawing on biblical motifs as he develops it, is the label of sharing. Sharing is not melting the many into the one, and nor is it the fragmentation of the one into unrelated many. Sharing is, if you like, a common life in which distinctiveness is preserved. It's harmony, but without homogeneity, communion but without collapse. It's a richly biblical idea. It's there in 1 Corinthians 12, isn't it? But the Bible has a very particular spin on it that I don't think Nancy captures quite in the vivid way the Bible does. Let me read a passage from 1 Corinthians 12, starting at verse 12. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit, so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, "Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body," would it for that reason stop being part of the body? And if the ear should say, "Because I am not an eye, I don't belong to the body," it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts of the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, "I don't need you." And the heart cannot say to the head cannot say to the feet, "I don't need you." On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honourable, we treat with special honour. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honour to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honoured, every part rejoices with it. Astonishing passage, isn't it? It'd be wonderful to make a whole video about how this upends the sort of Roman tradition of the body politic, but we'll have to save that for another time. What I want to focus on in this passage now is that this is not simply sharing, is it? Paul's message in 1 Corinthians 12 is not just that the body is shared between its different parts. It is a particular sort of sharing in which the weaker parts are indispensable and the less honourable parts are treated with special honour. And that, I think, is the biblical distinctive. Not simply that society is a sharing, but that there's a particular honouring of the least honourable. It's not what you did for the greatest of these you did for me, says Jesus, but what you did for the least of these, my brothers, you did for me. So then, the dignity of each person, the resonance of that phrase, it already gives us a really deep biblical grammar for thinking about AI, for thinking about the whole of society, but for the purposes of these reflections, particularly about AI. It tells us, doesn't it, that the human person cannot be treated either as an isolated sovereign consumer or as a replaceable data point in a vast system. The person is neither self-enclosed nor a dissolvable fragment in the ocean of society. Each person's a singular creature called into a shared life. And this is where AI really does work, I think, as a litmus paper, showing us the consequences of our view of humanity. Because if you think that human dignity, your dignity, rests on your capacities, then AI is coming for you. Take the cluster of those terms that often dominate the discussion of what make human beings special, those sassy qualities: sentience, agency, consciousness, intelligence. They're very important faculties, aren't they? Nothing that I'm saying is diminishing them, but notice what happens when they become the index of our value. We begin to grade people on a curve, don't we? We start imagining the human being as the possessor of certain measurable properties, and the dignity of a human being to rest on those properties. We start thinking that I am valuable, I am dignified, I am worth something because of my performance, because of my function, because of my output or my demonstrable capacity. But if that is the way we think in this cultural moment, then we are on very thin ice, aren't we? There were ages where it was possible to get away with that. And if you were among the more productive and the more intelligent, you could go through the whole of life thinking that you really were valuable. But AI is coming for that ideology, isn't it? If intelligence grounds my worth, then a more intelligent machine doesn't just threaten my job, does it? It threatens my deepest view of myself. If problem-solving ability grounds my dignity, then what does a superior problem-solving machine do? Well, it doesn't just displace one thing that I can do, does it? It displaces me. If agency, productivity, or creative output are what make me valuable, then the moment that AI outperforms me in those domains, I lose the title deeds to my dignity. And we should be under no illusion, should we? AI is getting better and better all the time. It is often said that AI is now the worst that it will ever be. And it's only, what is it, November 2022? It's only a few years old. It's going to get better and better and better. And if we think that it will never overtake us in these capacities, we are monumentally naive, I fear. In other words, with the rise of AI, if I am my capacities, then I am in play at my deepest level. It's as if I'm in a casino and I've staked my mortgage, my car, my family, my very soul, and I know that I'm going to lose. And it's a terrible feeling, isn't it? It's a horrifying feeling. But it is the inevitable realization of an ideology that begins by valuing people by their productivity, by their performance. If the reason that I outvalue an animal is because I am more intelligent than that animal, then by that same logic, a machine that is more intelligent than me will surely outvalue me. Or as the Bible puts it in another context, if you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. And it's a disastrous place to be, isn't it? Undermining our sense of self, and also undermining social cohesion, undermining our sense of a common humanity. And AI, strangely, is helping us to see how disastrous this ideology has always been, although we've been able to get away with it for centuries. And this is why the Encyclical is right to warn against the ideology that every person must earn or justify his or her own worth, attributing greater value to those who are more efficient or more effective, it says. Now, this ideology long predates artificial intelligence, but AI is bringing it center stage, and it is showing it as the emperor who has no clothes. The emperor's never had any clothes. We haven't been able to see it so vividly, so poignantly, so embarrassingly, so terrifyingly before now. AI is forcing us to ask with sort of chilling efficiency, if a person is valuable because of their output, then why not? Why not replace that person with a more efficient output generator? If a worker is valuable because of his or her productivity, then why not just automate the task? If AI would be a wiser parent than me, then am I guilty of neglecting my children if, rather than parenting them through the use of AI, I choose to do so myself? You might think that's a far-fetched question, but it's one that's raised in a recent book by AI researcher Nick Bostrom, the book called Deep Utopia. The problem then is not that AI can do useful things. Of course it can. The problem is that AI reveals how easily we've already been tempted into defining the human person by usefulness. But how does AI shape us as we see ourselves? How does it form us into seeing ourselves? How does it push and yank us into seeing ourselves? And there's two parts to that response, but only one of them is usually visible. The other one is brushed under the carpet. The dominant story, the story that AI wants to tell us about itself, is a story of sovereignty. AI gives us power. It puts us in control. It can answer our questions. It can write our emails. It can generate our images. It can manage our workflows. It automates our tasks. It obeys our prompts. We are the sovereign. The machine is the servant. That's the story that we're sold. It's not wrong, is it? It does write our emails. But it's only half the truth. Because the same AI that seems to make us sovereign also, and at the same time, renders us servile. It trains us to depend on systems we don't understand. It often flatters us with sycophantic agreements, doesn't it? Chris, your idea is wonderful. I wish I'd thought of that. Oh, very nice. It turns our attention and preferences and desires and writing patterns and faces and voices and habits into extractable data, used to train future models to make profits, not for us, but for the corporations. We sit before the screen, don't we, like monarchs, summoning answers from the bowels of the machine. But behind the scenes, we're also being measured, profiled, and also nudged, monetized, incorporated into systems of value extraction. We're sovereigns at the prompt box, but we're slaves in the database. And that is the figure of the sovereign slave. And the sovereign slave is the person who feels more powerful than ever while becoming more dependent than ever, more expressive while becoming more predictable, more in control while being increasingly shaped by infrastructures that he or she does not see and cannot govern. That's the individual sovereign slave, and it's you and me as we use AI. But there is also a social dimension to sovereign slavery. In a world divided between those for whom AI is a scepter of authority and rule, and those for whom it is a chain of incarceration. Because for some, AI is leverage, isn't it? It's acceleration, creativity, profit, strategic advantage. Many of the people, I guess, watching this video are in that category, and I broadly come in that category myself. But for others, AI means precarious labour, surveillance, displacement, the trauma of content moderation, data extraction, the invisible work of making the polished interface appear frictionless. For me, to experience AI as a compliant servant, someone else may have had to serve the system. They will have had to tag images, label toxic content, clean data sets, train models, moderate horrors, have a huge data center built in their locale that sucks up millions of gallons of water that, due to a non-disclosure agreement, they don't know how much it's taking. And by those millions of people who surrender personal and cultural data to systems that will never return the value that they extract from that creativity. So in this sense, AI is producing a global sovereign slave culture. Some countries, some companies, some groups of people become the sovereign users, the owners of the system, and others become the mines from which data or labour or attention or cultural material are extracted, or the literal miners who go down into the earth under terrible conditions to bring back the rare earth minerals required for the AI industry. The wealthy world receives a seamless digital magic, while the hidden cost is paid by those who can least afford it. The powerful become more sovereign, don't we? And the vulnerable become more exposed. And that is why I think the Encyclical's insistence on the image of God language is so crucially important, on this idea of dignity that is universal, not the Roman idea of dignity, but the biblical idea of dignity. But I want to push this image of God discourse a little bit further in this video, because Christian discussions of dignity often hinge on this idea, don't they, of the image of God, the imago Dei. And it's often used as a sort of theological placeholder, or almost a get out of jail free card. You know, we say human beings have dignity because we are made in the image of God, which is of course true. But if we stop there, the phrase remains underdetermined. What does that mean? What is that actually, what work is that doing, this image of God idea? What is it concretely? What is it in detail? It can become a sort of doctrinal bucket into which we drop everything that we want to affirm about humanity without actually having to show our receipts. Human dignity because image of God, whatever that means. But I think if we do that, we actually sell the Bible unpardonably short, because there are rich, sinuous passages in the scriptures that put flesh on the bones of what the image of God means and help us to understand its implications in a sharper way than if we just trade on the term itself. One of my favourite passages that does that is Psalm 8. It is one of the Bible's most beautiful answers to the question that AI is forcing upon all of us today. What is a human being? It begins, I think, exactly in the right place for answering such a question, not actually with the human being itself, but with God. Its first line is, Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. We've encountered this language of names before, haven't you? Remember in Babel, let us build a name for ourselves. Isn't it curious that the great psalm about humanity begins with the greatness of God's name? It actually ends with exactly the same verse. An understanding of what it means to be human, biblically speaking, is bookended by recognizing who God is, by the greatness of God's name. That is the frame within which the glory of humanity can shine and appear. And this is absolutely crucial from a biblical point of view. Human dignity does not float in empty space. It's not some sort of mysterious substance hidden somewhere inside us, as if in a universe without God, we'd still have an obvious metaphysical glow that everybody could see if only they looked carefully enough. And this is why a form of words that's often used to try and defend humanity, it needs really careful theological handling, I think. It's the language of inherent dignity. Because if inherent means self-originating, a dignity floating free from God, regardless of whether there is a God or not, then I think it is profoundly misleading. But if it means a dignity that truly belongs to the human person because that person is created and loved by God, then it is exactly right. And it is cutting with the grain of Psalm 8. Because Psalm 8, I think, makes a point that is very often missed when we reflect on this psalm, which is that in a vast, cold universe, there isn't any reason to get excited about human beings. There isn't really any dignity, anything special about us. Dignity doesn't inhere in us in some absolute way. In a universe without God, what are we? I suppose we're a little ant crawling on a rock in the deep, dark void among trillions of stars. And if we fool ourselves to thinking that the universe will shed a tear when we die, or that the cosmic fabric abhors the torture of children or the suffering of humanity, we are fooling ourselves, aren't we? If there is no God, human dignity is something that we may nobly assert, and it's good that people of all faiths and none do assert it. But it is not something to which we can appeal to the universe as a witness. We can't bring the universe into the courtroom to vouch for our dignity if there is no God. And Psalm 8 makes this point. It's where it starts its thinking about humanity, not with a woolly, comforting, hand-waving gesture of human specialness, but with the cold reality of a dark universe. The psalm reads, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them? Answer, very little, almost nothing at all. We're small, we're finite, we're not self-originating, we're not particularly virtuous, not monumentally intelligent on cosmic scale, we're not self-explanatory, we're not the centre of the universe, we're not sovereign. If we try and find our dignity in a universe of trillions of stars, then the very best we can hope for is a grand self-delusion. But of course the psalm doesn't stop there, does it? It continues, you have made them a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned them with glory and honour. And in these compact phrases, we have a little biblical anthropology in miniature. Small enough to be almost nothing, aren't we, in the grand cosmic scheme of things, and yet crowned with glory and honour. Creatureliness and dignity. They belong together, don't they, in biblical terms? The human being is not a sovereign slave, but in this psalm, the human being is a crowned creature. Notice that verb, you have crowned them. Not they've crowned themselves, not they've earned the crown, not they've optimized their way to glory or they demonstrated sufficient intelligence to qualify for dignity. No, they didn't achieve economically measurable usefulness. God crowns humanity with glory and honour. The glory and honour come from him as a gift. And this is the opposite, isn't it, of the sovereign slave? Because the sovereign slave wants all the glory and honour without the creatureliness, without being willing to receive that crown from another. Wants the crown, doesn't want the dependence, doesn't want to acknowledge that it's a creature. It wants dignity as a possession, not dignity as a gift. It wants to be as gods, as one recent book about AI has it. But it ends up enslaved to the very powers by which it tries to secure itself. Let's look at these two figures side by side, the sovereign slave and the crowned creature. They're both package deals, if you like. They both come with both of their halves, and you can't have one half without the other. We can't have the glittering illusion of AI sovereignty without the dark underbelly of slavery that drives the AI industry. And in a similar way, we can't have the crown of glory and honour unless we accept it from a God whose creature we are. No creature, no crown. It's the chorus, isn't it, in the tragic ballad of the sovereign slave. So then there are two very different routes to dignity. The route of the sovereign slave says grasp, seize, optimize, prove, perform, dominate, and perhaps you will achieve significance. But as you do so, be very afraid. Because if your dignity depends on your performance, then AI is coming for you. And its pursuit is relentless. And the other route says receive, answer, rule by all means, but rule as a gift. And discover that significance was never yours to manufacture in the first place. Your dignity is not a prize that you win by virtue of your performance. It is the beginning from which faithful action flows. And that means, doesn't it, that the crowned creature isn't passive, just in the same way that Nehemiah wasn't passive. Psalm 8 goes on to talk about humanity's rule. It speaks of domination over the works of God's hands, of sheep and oxen and beasts of the field, birds of the heavens, fish of the sea. Now, the human being is given activity, stuff to do, a real vocation in creation. We're made to lead, to act, to cultivate, to tend, govern, make, order, build. But our rule is a received rule. It's a delegated sovereignty. It's the rule of a creature under God. It's dominion as stewardship. not the Babelian dominion of self-divinization. And this, therefore, is another instance, isn't it, of the active reception that we saw in relation to Jeremiah. Human dignity is received. The crown is put on our heads by God, but it is not received inertly. It becomes a vocation. God crowns the creature, and the crowned creature acts, rules, cares for the world. It acts because it's received the crown, not in order to receive the crown. In the sovereign slave imagination, it's completely the other way around, isn't it? Performance generates glory. Let us make a name for ourselves, not let us receive the greatness of a name and then go and make. In Psalm 8, glory generates faithful performance. We receive the crown, we go and rule. We don't work in order to become dignified. We work because we have already been dignified with a glory and honour that can only be given by God, and that cannot exist in a cold, dark universe without him. We don't build in order to make a name for ourselves. We build because the Lord has already set his great name in all the earth. And the New Testament takes this even further. Hebrews reads Psalm 8 in the language of Christ. It says that at present we do not yet see everything subject to humanity. It's true, isn't it? When we look out of the window, the world is not yet being ruled perfectly. It's a very honest assessment of the state of the world. And we see exploitation, don't we? We see weakness, death, humiliation, failure of human rule. But listen to what Hebrews goes on to say. What do we see? We see Jesus made a little lower than the angels and crowned with glory and honour because of his suffering and death. Wait a minute. That's the same language that Psalm 8 was using to talk about the whole of humanity, isn't it? Do you see what Hebrews is doing? The crowned creature has a name. His name is Jesus Christ. He is, this is the argument that Hebrews is making, the true human being. And if we want to build on biblical foundations, he is, so to speak, the very model of a modern anthropology. He is the one in whom sovereignty and servanthood are no longer torn apart into a tragic contradiction of the sovereign slave. He is truly Lord of the universe. It's the witness of the scriptures, isn't it? And he is truly a servant, as Philippians 2 reminds us. Let me just read that Philippians 2 passage, because it is the subversive fulfillment of the desire of the sovereign slave. It is the diagonalization of sovereignty and slavery in the death and resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. Let me read Philippians 2. Being in very nature God, Christ did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of what? Of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So what have we got in this passage? We've got sovereignty, haven't we? Equality with God is something that Christ has, but he doesn't feel the need to use it to his own advantage. We've got sovereignty. And we also have slavery, don't we? He took the very nature of a servant, humbled himself, became obedient. But this is very, very different to the split identity of the sovereign slave. Because Christ's lordship and his service, his sovereignty and his slavery, flow from the same source. They both flow from an obedient love for the Father. He doesn't grasp equality with God. He receives. He obeys. He gives himself. He suffers. He dies. And as the passage goes on to say, he is exalted. That is the final Christian answer to the question of dignity. The conundrum of the sovereign slave solved in Christ's sovereignty and Christ's slavery and our being united to him. And this is why, to go back to that phrase from Magnifica Humanitas, that quotes dignity of each person is such a powerful criterion for the age of AI. because it asks us to look at the systems we're building and to ask, do they honour the crowned creature? Or are they in fact producing sovereign slaves? Do they treat people as beings whose worth precedes their output, or as resources to be optimized? Do they protect the weak, or do they merely accelerate the strong? Do they enable genuinely human agency, or do they create new dependencies and addictions? Do they honour each person in her or his singularity, or do they flatten us into data points? The dignity of each person means that AI, any technology, must never be allowed to become a machine for sorting human beings according to our usefulness. It must never be allowed to tell us explicitly or implicitly that the intelligent matter more than the unintelligent, the productive more than the unproductive, the efficient more than the inefficient, the young more than the old, or even the old more than the young, the wealthy more than the poor, or the connected more than the forgotten. And it also means that a fully rounded, rich Christian response to AI can never simply be humans are still better than machines at certain things. It's the old AI will never argument, isn't it? AI will never have irony. 50 years ago, people were saying AI will never be able to use or understand natural language. Well, all of those statements may be true for a while, but they're not enough. And it is a betrayal of the biblical basis of our human dignity to hang human dignity on the hook of one of these statements. AI will never be able to do this, that, or the other. The Christian claim is far deeper, and it is far more secure, wonderfully. It is that human beings are crowned creatures. Our dignity is given before it's demonstrated by any of our sassy qualities. It's received before it's performed. And it's shared by each person without collapsing the distinctiveness of any person. Because it's given by God, can't be computed, can't be automated, can't be outperformed, can't be disrupted, and most crucially of all, it cannot be taken away. So far, we've looked at two great themes of this encyclical. First, the contrast between Babelian grasping and Nehemiah active reception, and secondly, the dignity of each person. Now we want to turn to the other half of the phrase that I'm treating as the centre of the encyclical's moral vision. We're passing from the dignity of each person to the good of all peoples. And that means we need to reflect on the idea of the common good. And common good's a term everywhere in Magnifica Humanitas. It appears more than 80 times, I counted, in the document, including the headings and the notes. It's there in the introduction, where the encyclical speaks of building for the common good. It's there in the section on Catholic social doctrine, the first big major section. It's there when the document turns to digital power and algorithms and data and regulation and truth and democracy and peace and all those great social political terms. It is not a decorative phrase added after the real technological or theological analysis has been done, that the common good is baked into, it's hardwired into the deep themes of this encyclical's argument. And the encyclical gives a really strong account of the common good as well. It says that the common good is, to use its language, the social expression of the dignity recognized in every human person. And I think this is a really helpful formulation because it links dignity, individual human dignity, the dignity of each person, to the common good. And therefore it means that dignity isn't merely a private possession. If each person has dignity, then social and economic and political and technological life must be ordered in such a way that that dignity of each person can be honoured. The common good, therefore, in the way the encyclical constructs it, is dignity taking social form. The encyclical quotes the Second Vatican Council's definition of common good as the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or as individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily, unquote. But it immediately guards that definition against a flattening understanding of it. Because the common good, therefore, is not merely a checklist of institutions, if this is the definition that we're going to run with. It's not the sum of individual benefits. It's not an intersection or even an aggregate of private interests. It's a greater good that belongs to each one and that can only be achieved and nurtured and protected by our collective efforts. The Encyclical has a really catchy way of talking about this. It speaks of the common good as a plus. And what it means by that is if we add up all the individual goods, we still haven't explained the extra reality that emerges when persons and groups and families and institutions and peoples live together in a just and ordered way. In other words, the common good is not just the sum of all the individual goods, it's a plus on top of that. The whole is very much greater than the sum of its parts. Another way of thinking of it is a people is not a heap of individuals, in the same way that the common good is not a heap of individual goods. It's something more, something emerging from the whole. And this idea is very close to what throughout this video I've been referring to as sharing. Sharing doesn't mean homogeneity. It doesn't mean that everybody becomes the same, that every nation or culture or family or person is absorbed into a single and differentiated mass. Sharing doesn't mean the abolition of private property or the abolition of cultural diversity. And the Encyclical is also at pains to point that out. It's very clear that the global common good has to be safeguarded without compromising the differences between peoples and nations. And the common good is not sameness. It is this beautiful idea of harmony without uniformity. It's the picture in Revelation 7, isn't it, of every tongue, tribe, and nation gathered around the throne, praising God, and yet remaining distinctively each tongue, tribe, and nation. The common good is the good of all peoples, not the flattening of all peoples into one people. And it's this plus version of the common good that the Encyclical uses to orient us in relation to AI. Because the document asks whether digital infrastructures and algorithms foster participation and responsibility, whether they protect the vulnerable, whether they ensure fair access to opportunities, and remain directed towards the good of all. It insists that responsibility must be clearly defined at every stage of AI design, and that responsibility must always ultimately rest with human beings, whether it's in the use of autonomous weapons or any other artificial intelligence technologies. It warns that AI tends to amplify the power of those who already possess economic resources. And then it suggests that data itself needs to be thought of creatively as a common shared good. I think it's an incredibly powerful idea in the Encyclical, the idea of data as a common good, rather than something simply sold off or entrusted to a select few. So Magnifica Humanitas then gives us a rich political and social account of the common good. But I want to press a bit further on the question, what do we mean when we use the term common good? Because I think we can find more insights into this cultural moment of AI than those that can be contained within the document itself. One of the great dangers in modern life is that the common good, just very quietly, little by little, gets translated into something else that we can call common utility. And it's a really crucial distinction, I think. The 20th century German Catholic philosopher Josef Pieper argues in his wonderful book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, that common utility is a very different beast indeed to the idea of common good. It's an astonishing book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. It was published back in 1948, but some of the trends and the tensions that it points out in modern society, cultural commentators today are still peddling as if they are new insights for the 21st century, but way before its time, in my opinion. I want to read an extended quotation from Pieper, where he introduces the idea of the common utility, and then he contrasts that with common good. This is what he writes. The workaday world is the world of the working day, the world of usefulness, of purposeful action, of accomplishment, of the exercising of functions. It's the world of supply and demand, the world of hunger and the satisfaction of hunger. It's a world dominated by one goal, the realization of the common utility. It's the world of work, to the extent that work is synonymous with useful activity, a characteristic both of activity and effort. The process of working is the process of realizing the common utility. This concept is not equivalent to that of the common good, bonum commune. The common good is the common utility is an essential component of the common good, but the concept of the bonum commune is more comprehensive. For example, as Thomas puts it, there are people who devote themselves to the unuseful life of contemplation, who philosophize. To philosophize belongs to the common good. Whereas one could not say that contemplation, vision, or philosophizing serve the common utility. Of course, in the present day, bonum commune and the common utility seem to be growing more identical every day. Of course, it comes to the same thing. The world of work threatens to become, our only world, to the exclusion of all else. The demands of the working world grow ever more total, grasping ever more completely the whole of human existence. So for Pieper then, the common utility is the world of usefulness. It's the world of need, of function, production, measurable contribution, social service. It's the world in which we ask, what does this do? What output does it generate? What need does it meet? What function does this thing perform? How does it contribute to the machinery of social organization? And as Pieper is very quick to point out, there's nothing wrong with these questions. There's nothing wrong with common utility. Matters enormously, doesn't it? We need food to eat. We need shelter, wages, medicine, clean water, transport, hospitals, schools, and so on and so on and so on. A society that despises utility is not a humane society. Hungry people need bread, not merely poetry. Sick people need medicine, not merely music. People who have no money need wages, not merely metaphysics. But Pieper's point in the paragraph that I read out is that common utility isn't the same as common good. It's part of common good, but it cannot be taken for the whole. The common good includes what is useful, but it also exceeds what's useful. It includes goods that cannot be justified simply by their measurable output. The example that Pieper gives is contemplation. We could also think, and he mentions these elsewhere in his book, of worship, festivals, friendship, beauty for its own sake, truth, wisdom, rest, Sabbath, the joy of receiving the world as a gift. These things aren't useless in the sense of being worthless, but they're beyond use in the sense that they are too good to be reduced simply to use. Which is why I think Pieper's distinction between the common utility and the common good is absolutely crucial for our thinking about AI. Because artificial intelligence, if it is anything, is astonishingly good at optimizing for common utility. It predicts, it classifies, it accelerates, it generates, it coordinates. It is built for usefulness, and it delivers usefulness in spades to us. It belongs naturally to the world of function and calculation, the world of means and outputs, efficiency and measurable goals. But that is also why it is so incredibly dangerous when it becomes a dominant driver of a society's imagination. Because if AI trains us to see every good as a function, every person as a data point, every institution as a delivery mechanism, every act of communication as information exchange, then it doesn't merely serve the common utility. It begins to redefine the common good as common utility. Now, it wouldn't have been the first technology, of course, or the only technology or ideology to do this. In fact, this is a particular pathology of the modern West as it's developed over the past few centuries. Now, we can see one strand of this way of thinking developing through the thought of Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes, you'll remember, is writing in the shadow of the English Civil War. It's not difficult to understand the urgency, therefore, that he gives to the idea of peace in all his writing. Human beings, he imagines, are trapped in rivalry and fear and the threat of violent death, and that the first and predominant political good is to ensure peace. The Commonwealth, as he thinks about it, is structured to secure life and order and protection. And of course, that's not nothing. Those are things that we would hope to have in a society. Peace is a real good. Security is a real good. Crumbs avoiding civil war is a real good. But for Hobbes, the common good begins to contract toward common preservation, common security, and ultimately common utility. Politics is increasingly imagined as an artificial mechanism for managing fear and producing peace. Or think of Francis Bacon. He gives us a more technological and epistemological version of the same type of shift. Bacon changed the West's idea of what counts as knowledge, or at least what knowledge is for. Because for Bacon, knowledge isn't primarily contemplative participation in the true nature of things. It's not about communion. It's certainly not about doxology. Knowledge is power. Its value is measured by its fruits, whether it works, its capacity to, as he puts it, relieve the human estate. Again, there's something deeply attractive here, isn't there? Bacon wants knowledge that heals, that feeds, that improves, that liberates. And I think we do as well, don't we? Those are good things. We want bridges that don't fall down. We want medicines that actually cure people. We want theories that work. But the danger in all this is that knowledge becomes justified by usefulness alone. Contemplation, therefore, gives way to control and mastery. Truth comes to be measured against the single yardstick of what it allows us to do in the world. René Descartes radicalizes this program by calling for a new, much more practical philosophy, through which we might become, in his famous phrase, the, quote, masters and possessors of nature. The world, in this way of looking at things, is no longer received as a gift, something to be contemplated with wonder and responded to with gratitude. It becomes raw material. Later, the philosopher Heidegger would call it standing reserve, Gestell, raw material for human control. The common good is increasingly imagined as the product of technical mastery. The common good means more knowledge, more power, more control, more utility. And then with the philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, this trajectory is given an explicit ethical name, utilitarianism. Bentham's utilitarianism makes happiness, which he understands in terms of the presence of pleasure and the absence of pain, that's the measure of right and wrong. And Mill gives this tradition a richer and more humane form. He distinguishes between higher and lower pleasures, but the basic frame is still the same. The good is assessed and judged by its contribution to the greatest happiness. Now, of course, again, there's something morally serious here, isn't there? It's better to care about human happiness than to be indifferent to suffering. But the danger is that the common good is no longer understood as a shared object of love or as participation in truth, beauty, justice, worship. It becomes the aggregate management of satisfactions. And the question is no longer what is worthy of our common love, but what arrangement produces the greatest net benefit. Now, put all these strands together from Hobbes to Mill. What we begin to see is the emergence of a way of looking at the world, a way of living in the world, where utility becomes the dominant, often the exclusive measure of good. And I want to put a label on this. I want to call it the utilitarian imaginary. I'm using utilitarian in a sense wider than Bentham or Mill's utilitarianism. The utilitarian imaginary is a whole way of imagining and living in reality in which everything must justify itself ultimately by its usefulness. So in the utilitarian imaginary, the basic question is, what does it produce? How does it function? How can it be optimized? How well does it perform? How measurable is the benefit that it delivers? What problem does it solve? Again, those aren't bad questions, they're necessary questions, but they cannot be the only questions. They cannot dominate the horizon of our understanding of the good. Because if they do, then little by little a person becomes a functionary. Schools become skills pipelines. Universities become workforce engines. And the body, your body and mine, become rather inefficient productivity platforms. The family becomes an economic unit. Language becomes information transfer. Friendship becomes networking. Rest is transformed simply into recovery in order that we can do more work, as Pieper very presciently pointed out. Worship simply becomes a means of social cohesion. The poor become a metric on a spreadsheet somewhere, and the common good inevitably becomes the common utility. And this is what Christians need to see clearly. And it's what Christians need to be in the forefront of pushing back against. When Christians fight for the common good on a biblical basis, we're not merely asking for a bigger share of social usefulness. We are fighting against a vision of society that reduces the good to the useful. We're saying that a society is not good simply because it is efficient, or productive, or secure, or innovative, or wealthy, or well managed. A society is good when it orders the useful toward what is finally worthy of love and worship. And this is where AI becomes such a revealing test case. Because AI is wired, it appears, to reduce common good to common utility. It's not that everyone building AI is malicious, of course not. It's not that AI is simply evil. That's an oversimplification of a very complex situation. But it is that the inner machinery of AI, how these models work, as well as the infrastructure of the AI industry, is all about optimization. AI systems require objectives and metrics and training signals and classifications and rankings and predictions and outputs and so on and so on. They work by translating the reality, the messy reality in which you and I live, into processable patterns and then predicting those patterns. They are excellent at means, but utterly incompetent when it comes to final ends. We might think of them as means machines. So when AI enters education, the question so easily slips into being, how do we maximize learning outcomes? When it enters healthcare, we find ourselves asking, how do we optimize triage and diagnosis? When it enters the world of work, we ask, how do we increase productivity? When it enters politics, we say, how do we target messages? How do we manage populations? And when it enters friendship and care, we end up asking questions like, how do we simulate responsiveness? When it enters culture, we ask, how do we generate more efficient content transfer? Again, as Pieper reminds us, those are not objectionable questions in and of themselves, but the deep danger is that they become our only questions, our whole horizon. The danger is not that AI argues that common utility is the highest good, ultimately, it's that AI makes that assumption feel natural, so that we never think to question it in the first place. So let me introduce a distinction that I think is fundamental in the history of Christian theology, and that has very deep roots in the Bible. It's the distinction between use and enjoyment. Augustine famously talks about this crucial difference in his book On Christian Doctrine. And the Latin terms that he uses for use and enjoyment are still used to talk about these things today. He talks about uti, using, and frui, enjoyment. To use something is to relate to it precisely as a means to an end, not to the end in itself, not as an end in itself. It's something that refers us to an end beyond itself. To enjoy something, by contrast, is to rest in it, to use Augustine's language, as loved for its own sake. Now, I think this distinction can be really easily misunderstood, because Augustine doesn't mean that to use something is bad. Most of life involves using things, doesn't it? Food, tools, money, institution, technology. That's not the problem. The problem is when everything becomes use and nothing is enjoyed. The means becomes a means that has lost its end. It's just an endless chain of means going round and round and round. A perpetual cycle of uti with no frui at the end of it. For the utilitarian imaginary, therefore, everything is for something else. Everything is a means, nothing's an end. Work is for income. Income's for consumption. Consumption's for identity. Well, identity is for recognition. Recognition's for security. Security is for control. Control is for optimization. Optimization is for performance. Performance is for work, and round we go again. The end never arrives. We're trapped in a never-ending concert where one warm-up band after the other comes on stage, and we never arrive at the main event. And the Bible opposes to this very dissatisfying experience a very different way of thinking and a different way of living in the world. I want to call this the doxological imaginary. Now, to live in the doxological imaginary doesn't mean, once again, that we despise use, but it means that we restore use to its proper place by locating it within a context of enjoyment and gratitude and praise and gift. The world is not, first of all, encountered as a raw material for our projects. It is received as a creation, received with thanks. The neighbour is not first an obstacle or a customer or a data set or an instrument. The neighbour is first of all someone to be loved. And truth is not first a resource to be manipulated. It is light to be received. Beauty isn't a technique of persuasion, it's a splendour to be contemplated. And God is not useful in order to get me what I want in the world. God is the one in whom all true enjoyment rests, at the end behind all ends. Let me anchor this in a biblical passage. We want to draw all our insights, don't we, from the Bible? So let me show you a biblical passage that pulsates with the joy and the splendour of this doxological imaginary. We could drop into almost any psalm, couldn't we, and make the argument from there. But I want to do something a little bit different. I want to look at an episode from Jesus' life that we find in John chapter 12, verses 1 to 8. Let me read it. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here, a dinner was given in Jesus' honour. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to whatever was put into it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should have save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he'd raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him. So Mary takes very costly perfume. The amount of money for this perfume would have been a family's security for famine. This is a very significant object. And she breaks the seal and pours it out on Jesus' feet. It is certainly an extravagant gesture, isn't it? It is excessive. It is, certainly in Judas's eyes, economically irresponsible. And so he objects, doesn't he? Why was this perfume not sold and the money given to the poor? Well, it's a powerful objection. It sounds morally serious, doesn't it? It sounds like the common good. How decadent. Think of how many hungry mouths you could have fed with the money for this perfume. It sounds like a concern for justice. It sounds like the voice of common utility at its very best. This resource could have been converted into money, could have distributed to meet a very pressing, clear human need. It is efficiency with bells on, isn't it? Judas's intervention. But note that Jesus does not agree. Now, we know of many other places in Scripture where Jesus is most emphatically not indifferent to the poor. So that can't be the reason why he pushes back against Judas, can it? The point is not that worship cancels justice. Just read the book of Malachi in the Old Testament if we've got any doubt about that matter. The point is that justice itself withers when the only way we've got of thinking about it is utility. Judas can price the perfume, but he can't perceive the worth of Mary's act. He can calculate use, but he can't see fittingness. He can invoke the poor, but tragically he cannot recognize his own poverty before the Lord who reclines before him. All he can see is waste, whereas Mary sees worship. That is the collision, isn't it, between the utilitarian imaginary and the doxological imaginary, between Judas and Mary. The utilitarian imaginary, note in this passage and more broadly in society as well, is omnivorous, isn't it? Its appetite is bottomless. It wants to turn everything in the world, including love and worship and costly perfume and security and trust and truth, all of it, into utility. But also note that the doxological imaginary resists that universal acid of turning everything into utility. The doxological imaginary insists on the question, what is this for in its deepest sense? In other words, what is fitting? What is worthy? What love is being disclosed here? Ultimately, what end is all of this serving? Mary's act, pardon me, Mary's act is not useless because it produces nothing. It is beyond use because it's ordered to the one in whom all things find their end. It's not a random act, is it? It's a doxological act. It is an act of enjoyment, not merely of use. It is an act that acknowledges the presence of an end, not merely means. Jesus is here, right now. What good is expensive perfume if you cannot pour it out at a moment like this? And this is where the Christian biblical version of the common good, I think, becomes most distinctive. Because the common good here cannot be merely common utility. It isn't merely the greatest efficiency for the greatest number. It's not getting my emails done in 1 hour rather than 3. The biblical common good is a doxological good. It's a shared orientation to what is truly worthy of love. Listen to Augustine on this. In the City of God, he defines a people as an assemblage of reasonable beings bound together by a common agreement as to the objects of their love. And then he draws a crucial diagnostic conclusion from that. He writes, in order to discover the character of any people, we have only to observe what they love. It's a very simple idea, isn't it, on paper, but it is an extraordinarily powerful idea. A society is not finally held together by contracts or procedures or markets or borders or technologies. All of these have their use, but they're not what keep a society together. A society is held together by what it loves together. The theologian Oliver O'Donovan develops a similar intuition in his theological writing. A political community is not merely an exchange of utilities or a management structure for private interests. It's a form of common life ordered around shared goods that call forth judgment and action and love. So the question for a society, if this is the framework in which we're thinking about it, is not what can we efficiently provide? The question is, what do we love together? What goods are worthy of public honour? What would we break the jar of perfume and pour it out over? What do our institutions teach us to admire? What do our technologies train us to desire? What sort of people are we becoming through the things that we collectively praise? In the utilitarian imaginary, the common good becomes a product of technique. It's, if you like, Babel with a social conscience. But in the doxological imaginary, the common good is first received before it's acted upon. It's not invented by us. It's not manufactured by us from nothing. Whatever the powerful decide to call good is not the common good within this framework, thank goodness. Nor is the common good the aggregate of all of our preferences. It's rooted in a prior gift, in God's creation, in God's image in each person, in God's truth, God's justice, God's mercy, God's promise of a new Jerusalem in the future. And that's why the common good echoes once more with this active reception motif that I've been coming back to again and again in these thoughts. We don't grasp the common good into existence. We receive it as a task. We receive a world that's already been given to us. We receive neighbours whose dignity precedes our recognition of them. We receive a truth that's not ours to manufacture or manipulate. We receive the poor not as a problem to be processed, but as persons with equal dignity with everyone else before God. We receive creation not as raw material, but as gift. We receive technological possibility, not as destiny, but as a sphere in which we must exercise our responsibility. And then, having received these things, we act, we build, we organise, we legislate, and so forth. So, when the Encyclical evokes the good of all peoples, we shouldn't imagine that it's one giant optimization problem. No, it's a shared good that honours the dignity of each person and the distinctive contribution of all peoples. It's common, in other words, without being uniform. It's plural without being fragmented. It's one because it's ordered to a common object of love that transcends us, and it is many because that good is shared by distinct persons and families and institutions and cultures and nations. So the Christian response to AI, if it's to roar with full biblical power, can never be merely make AI useful for more people. That might be something worth doing, but it's not enough. The deeper task is to prevent usefulness from being the one thing that we can imagine benefiting all people. So we should absolutely ask whether AI can help us diagnose disease and improve accessibility, reduce drudgery, support education, expose corruption, and so on and so on and so on. Those are great questions for common utility. But Christians must also ask questions. And if others are not, we must insist upon these questions. The sort of questions that AI itself cannot answer, that don't fit within this framework of utility. Does this technology help us to love what is worthy of love? Does it protect spaces of contemplation and worship, friendship, slowness, silence, embodied presence in society? Does it honour persons who are, quote unquote, not useful? Does it make us more capable of receiving the world as a gift? Does it serve the poor without turning them into metrics? Does it strengthen shared life, or does it merely optimize individual experience? Does it deepen our participation in truth, or does it simply increase our command over information? The great danger is not that AI will be useless. The great danger is that it will be so useful that we forget the difference between usefulness and goodness. And that, I think, is the deeper challenge beneath the encyclical's concern for the common good. AI belongs very naturally, very snugly within the utilitarian imaginary. But Christian wisdom calls us, along with our technology, into a doxological imaginary, in which the useful serves the good, in which technique serves love, optimization serves justice, data serves persons, in which common utility serves the common good. So when Christians speak of the common good, then we're not speaking merely of a more efficient society or even of a fairer distribution of benefits or a better public policy, though all those things matter, of course. We're speaking of a shared life ordered toward what is worthy of love. Remember the beginning of Psalm 8. We're speaking of a good that's received before it's built, enjoyed before it's used, and shared without ever being exhausted. We're speaking of the good of creatures who do not make themselves, living in a world we didn't create, called to love neighbours whose dignity we didn't bestow, and invited into the life of a God who is not useful, although he is infinitely good. And that is the common good for which Christians must contend in the age of AI. Not Babel with better metrics, but Jerusalem, received as a gift and rebuilt in hope. So, where does all this leave us? Well, I began at the beginning of this video, quite a while ago now, by saying that none of the great achievements, one of the great achievements of Magnifica Humanitas isn't simply that it gives us answers, but it's that it's shifting the questions that society is asking. It's pushing the debate beyond capability and speed and profit and risk and regulation. And it is forcing us to ask deeper questions about what is the vision of the human person, of society, of work, of truth. What's the vision of the common good that we're building in the age of artificial intelligence? And for that, I think this encyclical deserves a serious and a grateful hearing. Now, I'm not a Roman Catholic. I don't receive papal encyclicals as an act of ecclesial obedience. But I do receive this document as a serious act of Christian public reasoning and as a significant intervention into one of the most important debates of our time, perhaps, who knows, the most important debate of our time. Because it brings the vocabulary of dignity and of the common good, of solidarity, participation, responsibility, into the heart of a conversation that often defaults to a much thinner vocabulary of productivity, disruption, competition, risk, and control. And at the same time, a document like this is not the end of Christian thinking about AI. It's more like an invitation, a provocation to further work. An encyclical is not a biblical theology, for example, nor does it do the work of a policy manual. It speaks at the level of principles of moral orientation and public witness, and that's one of its strengths. But those principles still need to be thickened in two opposite directions. They need to be thickened back into sustained biblical and theological reflection, wrestling with individual verses, individual chapters of the Bible, individual texts, and they need to be thickened forward into concrete practices and policies and institutions. Now, from my own position as a philosopher, I can contribute much more meaningfully to the first of those tasks than I can to the second. And that's what I've tried to do in this video. I've tried to take some of the encyclical's central themes and place them into a more explicitly biblical frame. So around Babel and Nehemiah, I introduced the contrast between grasping and active reception. Babel isn't simply bad building. It's building as a self-securing mastery. It's building against gift, building in order to make a name for ourselves. Nehemiah, by contrast, gives us building as active reception. It's prayerful, it's shared, it's distributed, it's responsibility under God. And that distinction, of course, is really crucial because AI is one of the great building projects of our age, and we will build it in one of these two ways. And then around the dignity of each person, I try to introduce the contrast between the sovereign slave and the crowned creature. AI promises sovereignty, doesn't it? It offers us power and mastery and speed and control and seemingly limitless agency, providing we can pay for the tokens. But at the same time, it can make us dependent, predictable, extractable, governable. It turns us into little sovereigns that we exercise at the prompt box, but little servants that we suffer in the database. And it creates a social sovereign slavery between the AI haves and the AI have-nots. And against that, Psalm 8 gives us this wonderful picture of the crowned creature, a contingent being crowned with glory and honour by God. It shows us that our dignity is not earned by our performance, our intelligence, or our productivity. Our dignity, our glory and honour in the biblical language is received as a gift. And then around this phrase, the good of all peoples, I introduce the contrast between the utilitarian imaginary and the doxological imaginary. Noted that AI is extraordinarily good at utility, at optimizing and classifying and predicting and generating. Many of those uses are really good. But the common good is not the same as common utility. A society isn't good simply because it's efficient. It's good when the useful is ordered towards what is worthy of love. And that is why Mary of Bethany's wasteful gift, its glorious, riotous act of resistance to the utilitarian imaginary. Mary shows us a world in which the highest good is not use, but it's actually worship. It's not calculation, but love. Not optimization, but doxology. And running through all of this has been this constant theme of sharing. One way to think about the AI age and the problems that it poses is that the great challenge of this age for us is the challenge of sharing. In one sense, it's a very practical idea. Will the benefits of AI be shared, or will they accumulate in the hands of a very few companies, even the hands of a very few individuals? Will AI strengthen participation, or will it intensify exclusion? Will it help the poor, the disabled, the lonely, the elderly, the student, the worker, the refugee, the person without access to power? Or will it in fact deepen the gap between those who own the systems and those whose labour and attention and data feed those same systems? Those are certainly urgent political and economic questions. But sharing is also a much deeper theological and metaphysical claim. We don't begin as isolated individuals who later decide to share. We begin by receiving a gift. We receive life, language, bodies, families, histories, creation, neighbours, time, ultimately our very selves, from another, from God. To be human is already to be implicated in what we share. And the question, therefore, is whether we'll receive that shared life gratefully and responsibly, or whether we'll grasp it as raw material for defiant self-construction. So this whole argument comes back to this central notion of active reception. Now, the Christian response to AI shouldn't be panic, but nor can it be surrender. It isn't stop building, nor should it be build whatever we can as fast as we can before someone else builds it first. It has to be something more grown up than that, more rooted in biblical truth than that, and also more demanding than that. Receive this moment, this cultural moment, this technology, as a gift and a task from God. Receive the technological possibilities of our age, not as a destiny, not as salvation, not as raw power, but as a field of responsibility. And then ask, how do we build in a way that honours the dignity of each person and the good of all peoples? And this certainly means resisting Babel, doesn't it? It means resisting the concentration of power, the flattening of human life into data, the reduction of truth to information, of persons to utility, of work to productivity, of education to skills, and the reduction of the common good to a mere optimization problem. And it also means rebuilding, like Nehemiah, not only in taking our section of the wall and doing our part, but in receiving the vocation to build as a gift, and a gift that comes with responsibilities to the giver and to our neighbour. Praying, planning, building, in hope of that city whose architect and builder is not us, but God. So if I had to summarise the biblical Christian toolbox for the coming age of AI that I've been trying to set out in this video, it would be this. Against grasping, active reception. Against scattering, sharing. Against the sovereign slave, the crowned creature. Against the utilitarian imaginary, the doxological imaginary. Against Babel, Jerusalem. Now, of course, that toolbox doesn't answer every practical question. It doesn't tell us exactly what every AI regulation should say, how AI should be used in the classroom, how every company should govern its models, or even how every Christian should use these tools when they get up tomorrow morning. I think it would be silly of me as a philosopher, wouldn't it, to try to answer those questions better than industry regulators and teachers and CEOs and each person for themselves can. But my hope is that this toolbox will be useful to all of those groups and to Christians in general as we help each other to think what are the key biblical ideas that we should bring to this age of AI. The toolbox, I think, can contribute to helping us name the spirits at work in the age of AI. It helps us to see what is dehumanizing, what is humanizing, and how to tell the difference between the two. It helps us to discern whether our building is an act of grasping or an act of active reception. And perhaps that, more than anything, is the task before us right now. And not to pretend that AI is nothing, and certainly not to pretend that AI is everything. Not to baptize every innovation because it's useful. Not to reject every innovation because it's powerful. But to receive this moment under God and ask how the useful can be made to serve the good. How power can be ordered by love. How intelligence can be placed in the service of wisdom. And how our common technological future can be shaped by the dignity of each person and the good of all peoples. So as we continue to think about that together, over to you.